Hey Ev, how's it going?
Good, K-Man, yourself?
Same as always, I guess. Just for those listening who may or may not know, it's been a while since we've done a podcast. And I guess there's been a lot going on
Mm.
with the recent protests and the transition from lockdown because of the COVID-19 and moving into regular life and dealing with the post-corona economic situation, social situation, and still kind of in it, right? Because we're still, as these protests are breaking out and everything, we're still in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
So, for myself, despite all this happening, I always bring it back to the subject matter we discuss here on Oneness Radio
Yeah.
and try to put it into that context. Because to not do so would be to say that these things only apply when I have time to sit down and things are relatively peaceful.
Mm.
I heard someone write sometime that we meditate in times of peace so that we can be at peace in times of unrest.
Mm.
So, do you have anything you need to get off your chest for now, or?
Yeah, so I guess it's been quite a long time since we recorded, probably over a month now.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a number of reasons why that is. The last one we recorded was 10.5. This is episode 11.
Yep.
And the main reason for me anyway is because I had a baby. So the sort of the run up to that, my wife was heavily pregnant, getting things ready, and then subsequently taking care of a newborn baby alongside a 4-year-old. So I guess finding time to sit down and record has been a bit of a challenge. But in that time, I've seen sort of a dramatic decrease in the amount of time I'm actually able to sit and meditate, just based on the sort of random nature of a newborn baby. So for myself, I really notice a difference in my sort of overall well-being when I don't have those sort of opportunities to sit and meditate daily.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay because, life happens. You can't always, you may do your best to try and find some time to sit, and it may not be possible. So I've, looked for alternate ways to be mindful throughout my daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And I do my best to sort of practice karma yoga, which is basically just mindfulness throughout the day. For me, it becomes the most apparent in terms of entering that sort of still space is when I get emotionally charged, particularly when I'm super frustrated or I get really angry or something like that. Those are the moments when I've trained my mind to say, hold on a second, settle down. It's all right that you're angry. However, don't project it onto the people in your life because they need you to be stable and still, and you need that as well. So it's sort of that releasing of that pent up energy or vrittis or whatever you like to call them, the karma that you've built up, over your lifetime, and the conditioning that you've acquired in your lifetime, and slowly letting that go, being aware of it when it arises and not making yourself feel guilty about it, just realizing that there are still things that need to be addressed and looked at and worked on, and just to allow it to arise in that space of pure stillness. And the more that you sort of do that sort of work, the less intense it is when those situations arise again.
Mm-hmm.
And the less often it actually does happen as well. So for me, in the last sort of month that we, since we recorded, it's been really practicing mindfulness throughout my day because it has been challenging, not only with, COVID-19 and my newborn baby, but also the protests that have been happening over the death of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really what's been happening with me. How about yourself?
Well, first to address what you were saying, what I'm hearing from you is a lot of just excuses, buddy. Because I mean, you're talking about baby and pregnant wife and all that stuff. Meanwhile, on my end, I have real problems like catching up on my Netflix, my vanity cooking projects that I have the time to do now, and trying to get the consistency, the bite consistency of my gnocchi and my handmade pasta right perfect.
I've got those issues as well.
So, and these are, trying not to rage out when I overcook my brownies, so, yeah, I'm just messing around, of course, but yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, life, you could say or let's call it the experience that you cannot turn off, that will come at you through your senses, will manifest in a myriad of different ways throughout the given time that you have the ability to do so, right? And you can't always control like how it's going to all work out and how it's going to manifest. And so you're totally right where, you turn that into a practice, you turn that into a devotion. And that at the end of the day is what it comes down to, is you have to be devoted. There's words for it like discipline and resolve and, all these things, but it comes down to devotion. And no matter, what we say in this podcast or what rationalizations one comes up with, at the end of the day, it comes down to you become more in tune to that which you are devoted to most.
Yeah, you had actually sent like a really simple but amazing message to me the other day. It was just basically receive, love, tend, set free. I thought it was just so amazing. It's just like it all boiled down to sort of, a few simple sentences or one simple sentence. And that's basically what I've been going through the last month or so.
Yes. Yeah. Receive, love, tend, and set free. And I was actually speaking to a family member of mine about this, where, we were kind of getting into not an argument, but just a discussion that became a bit heated on the other person's end, where, because they're Christian and I think they're, I can't remember the word for it, but not evangelical, but born again and of that denomination. And there's a lot of it is, it comes across as a rejection of all other forms of faith. And I was just saying that, I was talking with a friend of mine who is Muslim, and I was talking to him how, I don't know anything. Well, I don't know anything, but I'm not a practicing Muslim. But one thing that I do know is that if you are a devoted Muslim, you pray 5 times a day, right? And it just happens that, in my daily meditation practice, as it evolves, right? It went from just like, okay, I'm going to meditate every morning. And then it went to, I'm going to meditate every morning and then every night. And then it went to, okay, I'm going to meditate every morning. And then at that time of the day where I switch off from work to coming home before I begin my home stuff, right? And then it became, okay, I'm going to meditate in the morning. I'm going to meditate on the way to work, right? When I'm sitting on the train. And I'm going to meditate at midday on my lunch break. And then I'm going to meditate when I get home. And then I'm going to meditate in the evening. And so like it just, as the practice was progressing, I ended up moving towards a more 5 times a day type thing. And I was just talking to him how about I didn't set out to do that, but it just ends up happening. So, for the person that, kind of put out that mandate to pray 5 times a day, maybe there was something there where they just realized that if you're doing that, right, maybe it was something that was meant to evolve naturally, like something you're supposed to aim towards, as opposed to like be a mandate to say, do this. But yeah, we're just discussing how it evolved naturally. And how, people of any spiritual path or religion could take that part of Islam and say, that's a really good part of it. That's a really good thing to emulate and follow. Because no one religion or spiritual path has like let's say, the monopoly on the best way to do everything, right? Or the best methods of doing everything. For me, what I've seen on my spiritual journey is that each spiritual path in every faith has some really good points. And I've just been in deep gratitude that I'm in a place where I can accept what I need and what I think is valid and applicable from each faith without having to kind of cut them off just because they're different from what I know or what I practice.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I find a lot of times this sort of topic is hard to discuss with most people, right? Because they'll have a certain inclination towards a certain style of spirituality rather than just being opened to the possibility of anything getting to them to that space. And so it can be a challenge to try to speak to someone from, let's say, a Buddhist point of view if they don't identify with it, if they don't vibe with it.
Yeah.
And that can be quite challenging, which is, I guess, where listening is really key. And see how people are coming from it from their perspective. If they truly do need help, you need to find ways to sort of speak to them at their sort of experience and their level where they can understand, the ineffable, let's say, right? Because really we're just talking about something that can't be described. So if you can speak to it or speak about it in any way, right, then you'll be able to reach more people. However, I guess in saying that, it still takes a degree of openness to accept what people are saying, right? And like, I guess mine and your experience, we've really come from all sorts of different directions in terms of what we've learned, what spiritual discipline we've taken information from and assimilated into our understanding and developed a way to find that which it's all pointing to. Right, so a level of openness is key, right? Probably the biggest factor in it all is saying, I want that. I don't know what it is, how to get there, but in my heart, I feel that's the ultimate goal for me. And nothing else will do, right? Because I've tried other things and it just leaves me, empty and hollow and unfulfilled ultimately. Yeah.
I think a big thing, like as you were talking there, I was just letting what arises inside me just kind of come up, and it kind of came to this: is that a lot of people, they're like, yeah, I want some kind of higher spiritual understanding or oneness or whatever it is. Once we become a spiritual seeker, and then what happens is that people think that if I go this way, I might miss out on something else. And if I go that way, I might miss out on something else. So, and I know I've gone through this personally where I've like, okay, I'm going to study, Buddhism. I'm going to study Islam. I'm going to study Sufism. I'm going to study Raja Yoga, Advaita Yoga. You know what I mean? Like Kriya Yoga. And I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to do Christian mysticism. I'm going to study the Kabbalah. I'm going to do all of it just to make sure, Hermeticism, everything, just to make sure I'm not missing out on, like, if I go this way, I might miss out on that, right? Or it might be wrong, and I might like spend all this time doing this one thing and it'll get me nowhere. And there's that fear of missing out, or fear of going down the wrong path, or on a religious part, right? A fear of this is wrong and God will punish me, right? or this is wrong and I won't get into heaven, or what I'm doing is wrong and I'm going to get into hell. So people are looking for like, give me that unassailable, perfect way, right? That won't make me miss out on anything, and that'll guarantee, right, that I'm not doing anything wrong, and guarantee I'm going to get some understanding, or guarantee I'm getting into heaven, or whatever it is, right? Guarantee that I won't get punished. And this is, something that needs to be addressed, because this is a fear-based way of looking at the entire thing.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So I would say to anyone listening is that address this fear. Address it. Because it is subtly keeping you from that which you seek. And that is relatively speaking, of course, but at the end of the day, it's a fear. And this is where love comes in, where for me, what helped when I was dealing with this fear was to, it's weird I say understand, but to grasp or try to understand that I'm using this word loosely, so don't, put into it what the world puts into it. But the absolute, or God, loves you beyond what you're capable of understanding. So, like Rumi used to say, that which you seek seeks you. Whereas the Bible quote is saying, all you need is a mustard seed of faith. Just a mustard seed. And what you seek, what you want union with, it loves you beyond what you're capable of understanding as love. That's how much. And that's why I say, when I say try to understand, because you can't understand. That's how deep that love is. That's how broad it is. That's how all-encompassing it is. It's infinite. So I'd say to anyone, before you do a practice, or before you start to think and contemplate spiritually, or whenever you're kind of not sure about what way to go, just sit with that first. And let it take the edge off your anxiety. And let it dissipate and dissolve your fear. Just sit and let that love embrace you. And whatever is arising, let it fall into that infinite ocean of love that embraces everything. The good, the bad, the strong, the weak. Don't try to understand it, because you can't. The ego can't. The individual can't understand it. But you can sit in it and let it embrace you. Infinite compassion. Infinite patience. Infinite love. Sit in that. Let it enfold you. And then don't fight what thoughts arise to kind of jump up. Just let them fall back into that ocean that will never waver, will never leave you, will never stop loving.
Yeah, it's interesting how that's actually experienced. So as you're speaking there, of course, I'm sinking deeply into that space. And, because we've talked about this for ages now, every time we talk, there's always sort of some sort of new way to sort of think about or something to do to get to that space. And I think one of the most recent one was sort of like letting the sort of the infinite peace around you just to infuse inside the human being. And so like whenever, shit starts to hit the fan, emotionally, that's sort of often a trigger for it to just spontaneously arise, and all of a sudden like there's this ocean of peace, right? And still the emotion is still going off, but it's now sort of surrounded by this sense of just contentment and things are okay. It's like, don't worry, I got you type feeling.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. And it's hard to explain because you are that space, yet there's this deep sense of I amness coming from the human being, which is experiencing through the five senses, through thinking, through feeling, right? So there's a heavy identification with that. And it's like both of these are playing at the same time. And it's, I guess, the evolution, spiritually speaking, of the human being is to gradually and slowly disidentify with the one who thinks it's experiencing, right? And coming to the realization that you are the space in which that is happening. You are the peace there. And the more that you allow that process to occur, because it's really an allowing rather than a doing, the more the human being, let's say, is infused with that peace and love and compassion. And that's how you sort of project it out into the world rather than trying to be it, I guess, as a person.
Actually, as I was saying that, right? And then as you were speaking too, like when I talk of this infinite ocean of love that'll embrace all, what was coming to mind as a visualization was the last 10 minutes of the movie Terminator 2.
Okay.
Where they're in that factory and there's that big vat of like molten metal, like lava almost. And first the shape-shifting Terminator that can, change forms and stuff, and
the T-1000.
Almost like liquid metal. T-1000, that's right. I'm just describing it for those kids at home that too young to remember, but for all y'all that know, T-1000, right? He falls into that vat of molten and he gets melted, and then as he's melting, all the people and all the forms he's taken all pop up as he's trying to, like, first he's a man, then he's a woman, then he's a cop, then he's a truck driver. He's all the different forms he's taken on and the things he's done. And all of them, he's going through all of them, trying to take any form possible, but he just keeps melting into that warm, hot, molten metal until there's nothing left. And he literally becomes that. And it's traumatic because it's like watching different egos die and trying to arise and try to take form, but the inevitability of that ocean of that which will embrace all and makes all one within it is inevitable. But for, let's say, someone who is not open to that union, it's the death of that character in the movie is very traumatic for that character. Right? Because it's going to fight to the bitter end to try and take form, to try and deny that love. Right? But it will win in the end. And so even in the end, that character finds peace in oneness with what everything is, metaphorically speaking. But then when it comes for the Terminator, for Arnold Schwarzenegger's character to jump in, he goes in willingly and lowers himself in. And there's other forms and egos around him saying, no, don't do it, don't do it. But he said, I'm programmed to do this. I'm programmed to protect you. It's almost like he was saying, I'm programmed to think outside of my individual self, to think of the greater good, right? And so just like someone who has taken up a spiritual practice and opened themselves up to this, there's a deeper acceptance there. There's an openness to this ocean of love. So when one sees it there, and when they see it in front of them, there's nothing to fear from it. They actually go in willingly. And so he slowly, it's an iconic scene where he slowly lowers himself in, right? And just like his so-called enemy, now he becomes one with that enemy in that ocean of molten lava. And the last thing he does before, he raises his hand, he gives a thumbs up, right? And the thumbs up and the hand goes down, right? And I think that scene, in the way the two characters kind of become one in that pit, is a great metaphor for how it can be done, and how from one point of view, they struggle to the bitter end, and from another point of view, someone goes into it willingly, right? Having totally surrendered, right? Even to give the thumbs up at the end, right? So, like you were saying, since we've done, we've been doing this for a long time now, when it comes up and we see it there, the peace, the ocean, whatever you want to call it, there's a part of us that still resists, right? That says, but then that's what the spiritual practice is about, is that the other part of us comes up and say, nah, man, thumbs up, dive in, right?
That's a fantastic example. It's really good. But it also actually sort of reminds me of like sort of what's happening, collectively and, around the world at the moment, where, we sort of see this gradual movement in society towards the greater good, let's say. But, whenever we sort of make big moves in that direction, there's like this mad upheaval, that the resistance to the change, right? The resistance to the love, really, that we're moving towards. Because really, all these sort of social movements are about love, right? The breaking down of, self-imposed concepts of us and them.
Mm-hmm. And it's I won't lie, it's messy at times, right? It's messy. But let's say the structures that are in place instead of it, right, are messy in their own way. And so it's triggering a lot of fear in people because they realize we're not going to be able to just go, okay, here we go, and everyone loves everyone, right? No, it's going to be messy, right? It's going to be, for some people, it's going to be like the T-1000 dying.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's, and it's the bitter end, right? And that for some people that see themselves from the point of view of the T-1000, let's say, there's a lot of fear, right? There's a lot of fear. And it's not, let's say, from that individuated point of view, all that fear is deeply valid, right? And then there are those who are like, they want to jump in and dive in. And there are those who want to be slowly lowered in. So there's the whole range of it. And it's, there's no way we can do it as a collective in a way that won't be a little messy at times. But we've got to find a way. And this is where it sounds strange, but the individual does make a difference.
Yes.
Right? So that you can make your individual experience of this something beautiful, as opposed to something inevitable or something that I can't change or something that I'm drag kicking and screaming to. You have the choice to make this something beautiful. And that's the opportunity, and that's the option someone who is open to spirituality and open to their heart and open to love in general. That's the option you have, right? Is that you can make this beautiful.
And basically, I'm guessing that anyone listening to this is of that mind in general. You sort of most likely felt the pull towards that, saying, well, something's not working in my life. I'm open to something happening, right? And, that's what we hope this channel is for you, right? Because, of course, there's many avenues for us as we're going through our journey as well, because we want to get there, right? And even though we're willing participants in this, there's still the things that we need to go through and let go and re-experience the pain and trauma that we've been through in order to get there, right? So even for those who are willing, it's still a messy experience. And talking about sort of visually representing this, I came across this video a few months ago called In Shadow. It's by a guy named Lubomir Arzov, and I highly recommend checking this out. It's a short film, and it's an animation of what I would say is the spiritual experience and sort of a representation of modern times and the ascension out of that. Every time I see this film, like I cry. Like, it's only about 12 minutes long. I've seen it so many times. I know what to expect every single time. I'm like bawling by the end. It's just so impactful for me. And it really represented my journey through the things in my life to this point. Right. And I don't want to give any of it away, but you should definitely check it out. I loved it so much. I ordered some prints from it and put it up on my wall because it really does sort of illustrate the struggle that the individual goes through, not just as a collective, but as a person, to find peace. Yeah. But of course, it's worth it in the end. Right? It's worth it.
Actually, it's been a while since you recorded, and a part of it has to do with like, from this individual's point of view, is the process. Like what I call my process, which is, for me, the way I present things. It's like an art form for me, right? The way I speak, the way it's done. And so I kind of think of it like a canvas, and I'm going to paint with my words onto the consciousness of those who listen. And just like an artist, I need time to sit down and, find ways to articulate that which I'm experiencing in a way that can be understandable and relatable, as a way to give, really. It's a gift giving. That's how I see it. So I could sit down and just, I don't know how to explain it, but sit down in bliss, right? In that piece, and just be like, But something, in me still compels me or urges me or inspires me to find ways to share it in a way in which it can be communicated so that the person can share in the experience, share in the joy and the peace and love, right? That is there. And so we've been talking about everything happening in the world right now, and talking about levels of consciousness, and then talking about the spiritual path. And so I've been kind of in a cave, not in a cave, but I've been in a what I call a deep contemplative mode, where I'm not really talkative, right? I'm not really good in conversation. I can do surface conversation, but that arises naturally. Like, if someone asks, how's the weather? Oh yeah, it's hot out today. Okay. And then it doesn't require anything really of me while I'm in these modes. And what came out of that I can share on this podcast is, for the listener listening, when we talk about levels of consciousness, before we start thinking about, wow, I can see the light, or whatever it is, right? The consciousness that you are given to deal with is the regular human one you have, so to speak. So, don't go chasing waterfalls, as they say, right? And when it comes to that, there's a term in all this called self-mastery. And for a moment, if you would, and we've spoken about this before, but please consider the fact that your inner world, the part of you that no one else can hear, that no one else can see, the one that's not part of your moment-to-moment shared experience, is your inner world, or the world inside your head. And that appears to you as a bundle of thoughts and images. And it's made out of information you've taken in through your senses throughout your entire life's experience. And it articulates itself in the form of self-talk, the conversation or the voice inside your head. And it's quick because it can speak, and it speaks with images, it speaks with thoughts, it speaks with feelings, but it's speaking. And part of being mindful is just understanding that there is this level to you, that you are talking to yourself 24/7 without end. And if you don't address this conversation that's happening in you, then all that happens to you unconsciously. And at the end of the day, this is what guides your actions and determines the quality and the attitude with which you deal with your experience. So if you are not paying attention to what you are saying to yourself from moment to moment, not only are you not in control, you're not aware, you're not even conscious. You're a puppet, acting out a conversation that you're not privy to. So, it was given to me as the very first step on this journey, was to not do anything about what you say, not to try and change what it is you're saying to yourself, but to just sit and listen and observe what it is you're thinking, saying, and feeling to yourself in your internal world. Because your outer world can be nothing more than an expression of what's happening in there. It can't be. And if you've been living your life pretty much unconscious of this, then you've been living your life unconsciously, asleep at the wheel. But your hands are on the wheel, so you thought you were driving. And for a moment, having considered this, possibly having taken the time to sit and observe and not judge this, just observe, you realize that these voices, there's not just one. There's not just two. There are many voices within you that are competing for dominance from moment to moment. there's not just one single clear voice in there. There's different voices with different qualities, different voices with different motivations. And you become aware of the fact that it's not self-talk that's happening. There are a number of voices in discussion and argument and never coming to any real agreement within you. So, how can one ever be at peace if this is not addressed?
Yeah, and I guess, once you become aware of this, internal discussion, and you see how dysfunctional it is, and once you become really aware and conscious of it, you'll start to notice absurd thoughts and some downright evil thoughts. And you're just like, holy shit, if I can think that, then anyone's mind can function in the same way. And then you realize that everyone's just like you. And you begin to develop a compassion for, your fellow human beings who equally unconsciously allows their mind just to run rampant and externalizes some of those actions into the physical world.
And understand as well that you, and say someone you don't like or someone that you would judge as evil, you realize those same thoughts pass through your mind too. It's just that for whatever reason,
yes,
they're not in a position where they can dominate in order to take control, so you act upon them. But it doesn't mean that they're not there. And of course, a lot of people are aware of this, but then understand that how we choose to prioritize and react to these voices, how much of what you decide, what gets priority and what doesn't, has been decided by you as an inner person going like, I'm strong enough and I choose this because I'm good. And how much of it was just done because of your social and mental and environmental conditioning, how you grew up, the examples you saw. And if you had different examples, you might be listening to different voices. If you had a different environment, you might be listening to different voices. If you had a different socialization, you might be listening to different voices. If you had different experiences in childhood where you're deciding which voices to listen to, and also having some of those voices be formed, you might be a completely different so-called person because you'd be paying attention and giving priority to certain voices over other ones. And that is nothing that was ever under your control, and it was nothing that you decided. It just happened to be how and when and where you were born. So to take credit for that is let's say, preposterous. Yes, I'm trying to think of another word, but preposterous is the only one that's arising. And the one that would take credit for it is nothing less than an imposter. Because that's not true. Who could take credit for that? Who could take credit for, well, I listened to these voices and not these other ones because I chose each and every one? If you hadn't been aware that you've been living your life this way for years, how can you turn around and now take credit for the ones that you've chosen to listen to if you weren't even aware that that's what you were doing? and having seen the preposterousness of this imposter who would do so, you look around and realize that in the absence of my conditioning based on my environment and where I was born and how I was raised, how am I any different from the person sitting across from me? Besides the experiences. So when I'm looking at someone, I'm looking at a set of experiences that have shaped the way they're looking at things. Most of which they had no control over. So for me to sit in judgment of another is preposterous. And the one who would sit in judgment of another is an imposter, because it denies the reality. It denies what you know to be true with any type of self-reflection. And then arises a deep, like you're saying, compassion for the plight of the human condition itself, saying, I could have just been born over there and I'd be that guy.
That's it.
And so, instead of judging them now, you say, my God, it's me. There I am, here and there, spread out over the whole earth. Just in different shapes called circumstance. But in the removal of that circumstance, essence I am is the same in all life everywhere. It's one thing, taking many shapes and letting circumstances complete it. But to go back to the nature of the voices that you hear, to generalize, you have your angry voice, you have your sad voice, you have your anxious voice, you have your ambitious voice, you have your non-ambitious voice, you have your self-deprecating voice, you have your lazy voice, you have your happy voice, you have your, you know what? It's all about this. I got it, right? You have that voice. You have the, I'm not going to be able to hold together for much longer voice, right? There's all of them. And if you would consider now, in this world of voices, and when I say voice, I mean a stream of articulation that's happening inside of you and has feelings and images and even sometimes tastes and smells and sounds associated with them, but they're happening to you nonetheless. Understand, though, is that it's important to be conscious of which one of those voices is now the loudest in you, the one that has captured your attention. Just be aware of which one it is. Don't worry about changing it. Don't worry about fighting it. The first step is to be aware of which one has now captured your attention and is now sitting on the throne. Which imposter, right, is now seated on the throne of your attention. Let's just take one of them, for example, because it's one that everyone, I think, wants to deal with the most, is, let's say, the angry voice. Now, when the angry voice is there, notice, if you will, that the angry voice has its own set of memories, the angry memories. So if someone says something to you, you said, you know what? Man, that's the 5th time that person said that to me. And you think of all the other times. And then you might go back further and say, that was just like that other time when this person said this and this. And you know what? That's just like that time. And you know what? It's all because of this. And you go further back. And so the angry voice has its own set of memories, its own set of its own life within you that gets brought to life and gets brought to the attention, to the awareness whenever it's in control. And it even has feeling. It's an angry feeling. So it feels. It has its own set of memories. It has its own voice. So it's like its own life form, piggybacking on top of your, let's say, untouched consciousness. And if you will carefully observe the motivation behind the angry voice, its one motivation is self-preservation. All it wants to do is have you act, think, speak, and feel in a way that ensures that it will continue to exist. So that you will have to continue to use that angry voice inside yourself. And it wants you to express your physical being, your so-called life, in a way that guarantees that it will have use in the future. If not in you, then in someone that you're interacting with. But somehow it's going to survive. That spirit of anger. That's all it wants. That's all it cares about. And that's the same thing with your sad voice. It's the same thing with your happy voice. It's the same thing with every single voice you have competing inside you. And they are legion. But consider, if you will, in all of these voices, the peaceful, calm, loving, accepting voice. That one. Consider all the voices as a level of consciousness, the ones you were given to deal with. Now consider, among all those voices or levels of consciousness, the one that, if all conditions are met and everything's fine, that you know is the right and best voice of all of those ones. The one that's at peace. The one which embraces and loves. The one which receives, loves, tends, and sets free all of your experience. What if, as opposed to thinking, I'm going to meditate, or I'm going to try and be a good person, or I'm going to do all those things, what if you just said, I'm going to strive to never lose touch with that voice. I'm going to strive to hear that voice above all others within me. I'm going to make an effort that even if I'm caught in the grips of another voice, I'm going to take a deep breath and reach out for that voice within me and see what it has to say. What if I make that voice the master voice within me and never lose touch with it as I go throughout my day as a practice? Because just like all the other voices, calm, loving, peaceful voice is also interested in having you act, be and think in a way that creates a reality in which it alone is all you need. And this voice has one other benefit. It likes to be silent. Because that is its ultimate satisfaction. Follow the one in you that actually wants to bring you to peace, to stillness, to silence. The inner guru has been there all along. We just have to listen.
And on that, this has been another podcast with Cayman and Ev and Oneness Radio. I hope you were able to find the peace that emanates from your heart and that you are eternally. Peace out.